Last week, we told you about a classic cancel culture on campus story that right-wing media mysteriously, somehow, just completely ignored. The story was about Kenneth Roth, the man who ran Human Rights Watch for nearly 30 years and was called the godfather of human rights by the New York Times. He was recruited last spring, naturally, for a human rights fellowship at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. But Roth's fellowship was denied by the Kennedy School, whose dean is Doug Elmendorf, former economic advisor to President Clinton, who also ran the Congressional Budget Office. According to Kennedy School professor Catherine Sickink, Elmendorf said that Roth's fellowship was denied because Human Rights Watch and Ken Roth had, quote, an anti-Israel bias. Ken Roth told me on this show last week that Human Rights Watch calls out multiple countries for their human rights abuses, not just Israel, and he accused Elmendorf of lacking a spine. On Thursday, however, Harvard finally reversed itself and said it would offer the fellowship to Roth. In an email to the Kennedy School, Elmendorf called his initial decision an error, but did not explain why he had rejected the fellowship in the first place. He said, in part, quote, donors do not affect our consideration of academic matters. My decision was also not made to limit debate at the Kennedy School about human rights in any country. As I said, we spoke to Ken Roth last week on this show, shortly after the story initially broke, and I'm pleased to welcome him back now, following Harvard's decision to finally offer him that human rights fellowship. Welcome back, Ken. Congratulations. You've got your Harvard fellowship. What do you make of it all? What do you make of this decision by Dean Elmendorf to basically do a U-turn?
Well, look, at first, thank you very much for your support on this. I think it made a big difference. I'm happy that the U-turn happened. This is, in a sense, a statement that at least I can get away with criticizing Israel. But I think the important issue here is that this is about a lot more than me. I am relatively privileged. I was able to shine an intense spotlight on this, really misguided decision. But what about those many scholars, those many academics, the students who rightfully fear that their future could be jeopardized if they criticize Israel? And so what I hope is that beyond just reversing the decision on my fellowship, that the Kennedy School and Harvard University more broadly find some way to reaffirm the principle of academic freedom, to make clear that criticizing Israel is never grounds for penalizing scholars.
So what's interesting in the Elmendorf statement, and it comes in response to a lot of media coverage, including on this show, a lot of pressure from activists on the university and pressure from students, members of faculty who all signed a petition. But what Elmendorf doesn't say while reversing the decision is why he made the initial decision. He calls it an error, mistake, whatever. But you say, and you said on this show, that you think it was because donors, pro-Israel donors, put pressure on him. There's no evidence for that. We should point that out. He denies that donors played any role. What is your reaction to that?
Well, what we know, he told Kennedy School faculty that he made this decision because of people who mattered to him. That was his quote. Now, I don't know who those people were. Were they donors? Were they other people with influence? Who knows? But clearly somebody influential with pro-Israel views persuaded him to veto a fellowship for me. And I think we need transparency on that to make sure that this kind of nefarious influence is not exerted in other cases. So far, Elmendorf is not going there. He's saying, oh, these kind of decisions are confidential. Well, I'm willing to give up my privacy. Whom did he consult? And until we know that, I don't think we have any real assurance that what happened to me is just not going to be replicated with other people.
I just want to be clear. Last time you came on the show, and in fact, when you had the fellowship rescinded and you made your critique of donors, a lot of people said that's anti-Semitic because, of course, there is an anti-Semitic trope that rich Jews control powerful institutions. We should be clear about that. That is not what you are insinuating, to be clear. And you are Jewish yourself. I just want to be very clear on that.
Yeah, first of all, I have no idea who the donors are. I don't know if they're Jewish, if they're Israeli, if they're what. I have no idea. All I know is that Elmendorf said that people who mattered to him were behind his decision to veto me because of my criticism of Israel. That in and of itself is a threat to academic freedom. We don't need to know anything more than that. But we need, one, a statement of principle that this isn't going to happen again, and two, some transparency from Elmendorf, because that's really the only way we're going to ensure that he isn't going to quietly replicate the same kind of decision making in some future case. So we don't need to get into all these anti-Semitic tropes. I totally get that. I just want to know, how did this happen, and how do we prevent it from happening again?
He hasn't been full and forthcoming on why he made the initial bad decision. Got to ask before we run out of time, are you going to accept this new fellowship? Because I believe when they rescinded your Harvard fellowship at the Carr Center for Human Rights, you accepted a fellowship elsewhere. So where does that leave you now? Are you going to be teaching at Harvard? Are you going to be a fellow at Harvard?
Well, this was never a teaching fellowship. It was a research fellowship.
Are you going to be?
I will find a way to spend time at Harvard. I will accept it. I have, obviously made other commitments during this spring semester. So life's going to be complicated for me, but I will spend as much time at Harvard as I can.
Well, I wish I was a fly on the wall when you and Doug Elmendorf bump into each other on campus. That'll be a conversation. Ken Roth, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.